Well, Don, the United Nations, at a meeting that nobody in the United States heard about, decided that there should be no national borders, and Mrs. Clinton agrees. I'm Dan Perkins.
Well, uh, I agree with you on that one, but I also feel we have bigger problems at home than a United Nations resolution. I'm Don Massella.
It's time for Two Guys from Verona. Each week, you will hear from Dan Perkins, a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, and best-selling author, and Don Mazzella, a veteran journalist, author, and radio host, talking about things that concern you politically, financially, and socially. They will also try to give listeners a heads up on future happenings.
Well, Don, since we talked this afternoon, I not only am going to talk about what we agreed I'm going to talk about, and that's the UN meeting, but a couple other things came to my attention that kind of fit together. So it's a threefer for me. We had a meeting last week of the United Nations Habitat 3 Committee, and they had several things to say. They want to make people citizens of the world as opposed to citizens of any given country. So that if you're in a country that's in revolution, you should have the right to go to any other country you want to, with no restrictions. If your economy is in bad shape and you want to go someplace else, you should be able to go. They also believe that they must redistribute all the wealth around the world to make it fair to everybody. And, which leads into the second 2 points, we have to do something about global warming or we will not be able to save our planet. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Second part of this trilogy is the London School of Economics received $24 million through a subsidiary they set up to study global warming. They spent the $24 million. They went back for some more money, and they were going back for even more money when somebody discovered that all the research that this institute supposedly had done was bogus and wasn't original research. It was somebody else's research that they bastardized and tried to pass on as their own. So now we got a problem in the global warming sector is that the linchpin, this London School of Economics, where all of these people were talking about the impact of global warming and through all this research, is now bogus. On top of that, today, Secretary of Energy announced that the American people need to get ready to deal with less air conditioning and less refrigeration in order to reduce the carbon footprint, in order to save the world. Now, going back to the first story, what bothers me more than anything else, that we had 50,000 people at this conference from 190 nations. There were over 200 cities from around the world represented, and we didn't hear anything about it in the American media. Why? Because they have an open border policy. Mrs. Clinton said she was interested in open borders, but that doesn't sell well in the American population. So the American news media chose not to report on an event that took place in our hemisphere that is potentially going to affect our life in the United States. And yes, we had representatives of the Obama administration at the meeting, but nobody debriefed them as far as the news. Nobody talked about it. And here we have exactly the same problem that many of the middle class in Britain revolted against. The idea that an unelected third party, the United Nations in this case, or the EU in the case of the Brits, was establishing policy that was going to affect their people without having any voice to say what in the hell was going to happen. And so we have a situation where the UN is meeting We don't know about it. We're going to be the most adversely affected. We're going to have pressure from the UN on the next president to comply with the UN resolution for open borders, which is going to make our country more dangerous. And then we have the situation where our government is now telling us that we need to get ready to have warmer houses in the summertime and not as much refrigeration in terms of preserving our foods. I just think it's insane that we're looking at this, and it's all globalist in nature. Globalist does not allow for individual freedom, individual ideas. It is a common good, and everything has to be the same. I just think, and then we have this bogus research on global warming, and which millions and millions of dollars was spent for bogus research. But now we're talking about no reporters who had ever written anything against global warming were allowed credentials for this meeting in Ecuador. So I don't know where the world's going, but I don't like what I'm hearing, and I'm very concerned that our individuality and our freedoms are under attack. Our press isn't reporting it. Our president isn't talking about it. He's in favor of it, and it could happen, and we have no way to do anything about it. So those are the three things that I'm concerned about as an opener.
Well, that's one hell of an opening, Dan. I don't know where to begin. Well, first off, I'm really curious about the last item about the British School of Economics, where you saw that, because I'd like to follow up with it, and I'm sure our audience would as well.
I'll get you the link.
Please. That's number one. The first one you talk about Ecuador, you're absolutely right. We should know more about it. We should. We probably. The ironic part is we probably footed most of the bill for it as well.
Probably.
And as far as the last item, when we talk about refrigeration, the city of Dallas cannot exist without air conditioning. Nor can Houston, nor can El Paso and other cities in the Sun Belt. How we're going to... Jimmy Carter tried to get us to reduce our carbon print, and you saw where that got him. Everything you said there, Dan, I can't argue with you. I can only use the Yiddish word mazel tov and say good luck at trying to get the American media to even look at most of these items, because again it goes hand in hand with what has been your theme in every one of these talks, where people are just making decisions for us that we don't like and we have no control over. I'm back to you, Dan.
Yeah, I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that we have a government that seems to want to issue literally regulations every 7 hours that affects the way we do business, the way we live, and it's all done by bureaucrats, not by Congress, and they have the power of the law behind them because they issue these regulations. I know that there are probably people listening to this show and this subject about the elimination or significant reduction of air conditioning and refrigeration who are going to be saying that's just silly. What they don't understand, that it's not silly to the people writing the regulations. These people believe that what they're doing is in the best interest of the world. And America is the biggest violator, which is not true. China and India are the biggest polluters in the world, not the United States. And yet they have decided, where 70% of the American people do not believe there's a global warming issue or climate change issue, and that man can't do anything about it, the bureaucrats who are writing these regulations, for some reason, seem to think that they can, that there's something that man can do to change the climate. And I don't see how that's possible. There was a cute story by Rush Limbaugh a week or so, or when the Hurricane Matthew was working its way up the coast of Florida, and he had to evacuate his studio in Palm Beach and went to California, and he was talking about the idea that a reporter for the New York Times, your favorite paper, had that Mr. Obama could really solve the problem of hurricanes by just signing this legislation. And Rush was saying, so he's going to stop Matthew in its track and send it back because Obama signs a piece of legislation on global warming? No. I mean, I understand that Obama in and of himself is a narcissist, but even he, I don't believe, can, although he did promise to deal with the water levels. He was going to make the water levels recede like Moses. But I don't think he can stop hurricanes or tornadoes or typhoons or any of those things because we turn off our air conditioners. So I think it's really just a bizarre situation. And we look back over the last 8 years, and how many times have we said to ourselves when we heard about a new regulation or something that was being contemplated, that's just crazy. Yeah, it was just crazy, but it happened anyway. So we need to take a break. I'm Dan Perkins.
Don Mazzella.
We're the two guys from Verona. We'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Dan, I couldn't let your comments, which were very good from last time, go by without mentioning something I learned a long time ago. You know, these bureaucrats all think that by making these rules, they can change the weather and they can push back the climate change or climate warming, whatever. But as you were talking, a thought came to mind. There's an old line: "Man in his hubris made God in his image, and God in his kindness reciprocated." I use that as an example because I don't believe that what we're doing is really affecting whatever climate change is going on. I simply believe we're entering another a period of climate change. But be that as it may, the hubris of our bureaucrats sometimes overwhelms me. And then I got an interesting email. I have been lately writing for Constitution.com like you, and I wrote a piece about the fact that this weekend at Facebook they wanted to censor some of Donald Trump's emails because he wanted to prevent or at least stop the Islamic groups from immigrating until we had a better system. Well, the people at Facebook thought that was racist and felt that they had the right to censor these remarks. Now, beyond the hubris of some young whippersnapper, and they're young, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, saying that the president, a candidate for president of the United States that can be censored in a major media, which Facebook is, was scary. But what was even more scary was the fact that no one in the Facebook organization could make a decision until it went all the way up to Zuckerberg, who finally said, we can't. It was nice that there was some sanity prevailing in the organization, though how much of it I don't know, because no manager could put a squelch. But what was worse is that they're still complaining about it. And when I wrote about it, and it appeared today, I got an email from a woman from Facebook saying, how dare I call her young? So, and the people that are young, and they are, I've learned from other sources subsequent from that all of the people involved in this thing are all under the age of 26. So I wrote her back and I said, how old are you? And she said 26, as if 26 gave her the right to know what's going on. As you well know, I'm 73 and been through a few wars and a few other things, and I still don't know that I could ever act as a censor. We have a problem in this world today, one of many. You mentioned three earlier. I'm going to mention a fourth. We are now entering the age where censorship, not only coming from government, but from other sources. Um, if the young people think that Donald Trump's remarks about protecting our border are racist, what's next? Frankly, I'm a little worried. The piece that I wrote has gotten great play, and I hopefully it gets some more. What are your thoughts?
You know, it's an interesting dynamic that you're raised because, as you and I talked about this, I said we have a situation where there were people in Facebook in management positions who took it upon themselves to make a decision as to what we as the American people could hear. Now, the Constitution, under the First Amendment, gives us the right of free speech. Now, if the Constitution gives us the right of free speech, then the people at Facebook, and I'm glad Mr. Zuckerberg realized that while you may not like what I have to say, I have the right to say it, and you should defend with your life my right to say it. But on top of that, I think the other issue, Don, is that we have a society where our young people are being brought up and educated in our schools and colleges and universities. That if you do not agree with my position, you have no right to speak. We've seen it time and time again where people are criticized as racist and homophobes and sexist and whatever because they don't particularly agree with somebody else's opinion. If we're going to move to a country that's going to limit what we can say and what we can think only to what the majority thinks, then we lose the originality that made America great. I'm very concerned that there are people in positions in the media in this country today who are trying to decide what I have a right to hear and not hear. And that goes back to my opening comment, Don. The mainstream media, in and of itself, the way it censors itself and chooses not to, for example, cover Mr. Trump's speech in Gettysburg last weekend. No major media outlet covered it at all. They are selectively editing and deciding what the American people should hear, and they can only hear what is in line with their political agenda to whatever party at the moment they are aligned with. That's a serious, serious problem. You know, if you follow some of the emails from WikiLeaks, it appears that reporters were sending, from your friends at the New York Times, were sending stories to the Clinton campaign with the right to review and edit before they were released. So we have a political campaign deciding what a newspaper as old and established as the New York Times is going to print for its readers and what its position is going to be. That's censorship in a whole different way and not acceptable to me under the terms of our Constitution. Get one last comment. We got about 30 seconds.
Oh, I have a lot of comment, but the main one I want to make is that Donald Trump, if nothing else, has made it so that this type of campaign will never happen again. No matter who wins, the two parties are changed forever, and the American people are changed forever. If he loses, like Barry Goldwater, he will be the beginning of another conservative revolution that I think And I, by the way, still do not think that he's lost this election. But he will start another revolution that will culminate 4 years from now.
Okay, I'm Dan Perkins.
Don Mazzella.
We're the two guys from Verona. Go to our website, twoguysfromverona.com, and remember, if it's important to you, it's important to us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Well, I don't know whether the listeners are as confused as I am, but I've never seen such a dichotomy in polling data. We have the major newspapers and television networks showing Hillary up anywhere from 8 to 11 points. Then we have Rasmussen, we have Investor Business Daily, and the LA Times tracking poll all going the other way. Trump either up 1 or 2 or tied in the race. And I got to believe that it must be very confusing to the average person that how can there be such a wide disparity of the results in the poll. Now, we know in the most outlandish, which I believe was the New York Times ABC poll, where they had her up 11 or 12, that they oversampled Democrats over Republicans by about 9 points. But they said that 31% of the poll was independents. Only 26% of the total polling universe was Republican. I could be wrong here, Don, but I don't believe that independent voters make up a third of the population of the United States. The independent candidate is drawing about 7%. The Green Party, Jill, is drawing about 3%. But it does create an interesting situation because pollsters are running polls with Hillary head-to-head against Trump, and then Hillary and Trump in a four-way race with the Green Party and the Libertarian Party. And what happens, it appears that Hillary loses votes to the two outliers, where Trump seems to hold his own. Polling data is just amazing. I actually prefer the Rasmussen and the LA Times because they're daily tracking. But the one thing that I have is a flaw in the whole process is the size of the sample, 700 to 800 people. I know after the last debate there were almost 900,000 votes on the Drudge tracking poll, and it also showed that Mr. Trump won the debate by a much larger margin than other people. So, the idea that 787 people in the United States, broken down into Democrat, Republican, and Independent. So if you said a quarter of the, say, 800, 200 Democrats in the polling data, or 225 Democrats in the polling data, are going to be a representative sample of 200 million people across the United States? Might be, but I sure have a hard time believing it. Also, we know now, based on WikiLeaks emails, that Mr. Podesta told the various networks and major mainstream media what the mix would be in the polling numbers, because by skewing certain directions, he would get a more favorable outtake for or count for Mrs. Clinton in the polling data. And we see that because Podesta doesn't have any influence over Investors Business Daily, Rasmussen, or the LA Times. So it really is a situation where the polls are confusing. Now, I know that you want to talk about Harry Truman and the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper, Dewey defeats Truman?
The Chicago Tribune.
Chicago Tribune. And he didn't quite beat him, did he?
For the audience that who maybe are too young to remember, and I wasn't even there, but there's a famous photo of Harry Truman on the day after the election, not election night, holding up a Chicago Tribune paper that read "Dewey wins," when in fact Dewey had lost. But as I wrote in my newest piece for the Constitution to draw a line from you, uh, 2 weeks before the election, Dewey was told he had won. So what did he do? He stopped campaigning, and he went back to New York and started to draw up his cabinet. Well, Harry Truman got on a train. They had trains in those days, and he went to I think it's 114 different towns, and gave talks at the back of that train, and it really galvanized them. And I've covered campaigns now. Let's see, well over 50 years, and what I've noticed is, and we go back to Ronald Reagan, and we can even go back, by the way, to Lyndon Johnson, who even in 1964 went out on the hustings to seeking election to his own term, even though he was way ahead. The the American people like to see their politicians. They like to touch the flesh. They like to feel as if they may be exalted, but they're also one of them. Hillary Clinton has done a very fine job of maintaining a touch, but and I think it's ironic. By the way, did you see that she has gained 50 pounds over the last year? That's a lot of weight to carry on a relatively 5'6" frame. It's amazing what her well-tailored suits can do. But Americans are also, and I also said it in my piece today, are also concerned. Is she sick or isn't she? So she was out on the hustings today, but if you notice carefully, they're very controlled and they're not big events. And they are not many events. They're two or three or one. I believe there's just two events today. I haven't looked at her schedule today. But if you look at it, compared to Donald Trump, he is out there hither and yon. And the other thing that you pointed out to me, then I got pushback, by the way, from a station in Texas. The Democratic vice presidential candidate attracted 50 people to a Florida event.
30.
And
30. 30.
Under 50.
No, 30.
And Donald Trump had 20,000. And it was interesting. The commentator that had me on his program said, "But well, how many should he have gotten?" I said, "At least he should have gotten 1% of the presidential campaign, which would have been 100 people, but he didn't even do that."
Right.
There's something wrong with the way this campaign is being reported. There was for many years Theodore H. White, who wrote a book after every election about he was the term now is embedded with the campaigns, and then he wrote a book. He did it for 16 years, and they are wonderful masterpieces of reportage. But we haven't seen that in a while. All we have is Boys in the Bus, etc. I would like to know if anybody is covering this campaign and seeing the difference between the two campaigns. Back to you.
My guess there isn't probably anybody watching the campaign, at least capable enough of writing what's going on. But I do think that I was listening to a tape of John Chancellor in the 1980 presidential election, and when they came on the air at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, within 5 minutes, John Chancellor said, "It looks like Ronald Reagan is going to win big. At 8:15, they stretched it to 8:15. They called the election in an hour and 15 minutes because the turnout was so phenomenal. Nobody in the media figured out what the turnout was going to be. I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but based on what I heard today about the votes, the early votes in Miami, people around the block wearing red "Make America Great Again" hats indicates there's something going on. With that, we need to take a break. I'm Dan Perkins.
Don Missella.
We're the two guys from Verona, and pay attention to these sponsors. We need them. We'll be back in a few moments.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what is going to happen in our world.
Well, we got to take a real hard look about a bunch of stuff we want to talk about, but let's start today with a headline that I saw yesterday in the Fort Myers Press. Obama administration announces hike in Obamacare prices in less than 400 words. Now, the administration yesterday said on average, here's the word, on average, that Obamacare prices will go up 25%. The premium that you pay is going to go up 25% in 2017. Well, that might be average, but there are some places around the country, and I think is it Arizona, Don, that's going up 93%?
New Mexico.
New Mexico. Wisconsin, I think, is going up 63%. So there are places around the country where the amount of going up is much higher than 25%, and more exchanges are closing. I heard, for example, in the city of Philadelphia, there were only two choices in the city of Philadelphia. And so the thing is imploding, and when your premium goes up 60, 70, 80, 90%, and you have incredibly high deductibles, you virtually have no insurance. So Obamacare, and I thought it was interesting, and I would like your take on it real quick, the fact that the administration chose to tell that story 2 weeks before the election, that the benchmark program was going to go up 25%, and other people were talking about it going up, 93 or 60. Was that an arrogant move on the part of the administration, or just a stupid move on the part of the administration?
No, it was a required move. Don't forget, they have to, by law, the insurance companies have to notify their customers by November 1st about any changes in the pricing for the next year. And then you have 30 to 60 days to make your choices. But they had to do it because November 1st is the date by which you have to have in your hands a piece of paper that says this is what your insurance will cost, whether you're on the exchange or not. But what the administration did not tell you is the most popular, the so-called middle programs went up even more. Obamacare was doomed from the start, and I'm more and more convinced that President Obama wanted it this way because it depended on younger people joining. And yet the biggest increases, by the way, in the insurance was in the group under 28, which is the same group that they wanted to join. It's a mishmash. It's everything that the actuaries said when the law was originally passed has come to pass. And the unfortunate part is the American people. I write, but I love what it said. But don't worry, the government subsidies are going to keep those raises lower. But what does that mean? It means the American people will have to pay. And was it you that gave me the figures today about the trillions of dollars by 2000?
I'm about to get to that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
First thing is, 83% of the people who are participating in Obamacare are under subsidy. 83%. That means only 17% are paying for their own. That's number one. Number two, in 2016 fiscal year, it is estimated that the out-of-pocket expense of the federal government to subsidize the premiums for the beneficiaries is $28 billion. If it continues at the rate it's been accelerating, the Congressional Budget Office now estimates that in 2025, 9 years from now, the cost of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, will be in excess of $1 trillion a year. Where's that going to come from? I mean, are we going to have are we going to go tap the rich to get them to pay their fair share? The other thing is that, and I've talked about this, and not a lot of people do talk about what I'm about to say, is that I don't think that the administration wanted Obamacare in the beginning to succeed anyway, because what they were looking for was single payer, and single payer means that the central government controls your health care. And the fact that Hillary admits that there are some flaws in Obamacare, she's clearly welded herself to the outcome of Obamacare. I know that I heard Trump this afternoon, after they announced the rate increase yesterday, I heard him at a stop talking about the 25% increase actually being a lie. It was much higher than that. So he jumped on it right away. So, as I said to you a couple of weeks ago, it's possible that this entitlement program that came in when Obama came in as president could be gone by the time he leaves president. I understand you've got this whole issue about pre-existing conditions, but I think we can deal with that. Let's move on. You wanted to talk about Venezuela, and I mentioned to you the story about the problem without any air conditioning because of energy problems. People who are dying in the hospitals are left in their beds and they're exploding as their bodies decompose. Wonderful thought, but that's
in Venezuela. Not here in America yet, but it happened. You know, I've been talking about Venezuela for a year, and it's amazing how the leftist regime in Venezuela continues to stay in power, continues to do all of the despotic things that we've seen regimes like that do over the years. It was very interesting. I was talking to somebody today who's of my generation and who comes from Brazil. Came from Brazil originally and went to my high school. And we were talking about what we've seen and heard over the years. And what I come back with is, it is amazing how the dictators repeat the patterns time after time, and it's amazing how Americans see it, hear it, but do nothing about it. Venezuela at some point is going to explode, and there's going to be bloodshed. And who knows where we'll end up. But even the Chinese have, if I've read the reports correctly, have even stopped subsidizing Venezuelan oil and are starting to call back its loans. We're in for a bad fall there, and who knows what the result will be.
Let me ask you. I want to ask you a question about that, because I don't understand. Is it because it was in essence, a communist nation where Chavez provided everything for the people, and that they began, like many of the Middle Eastern countries, they depended on the government? You keep talking about it's going to fall, and I know that you're somewhat frustrated that it's continued to be there. But with all the protests and everything going on, is it simply because the army, at least at the moment, is in support of the president? Or is there another issue about fear that if we change governments, maybe we'll be worse off?
Well, they can't be any worse off than they are. As you know, when they opened the border to the neighboring Colombia, they clamor because there's no toilet paper, there's no butter, there's no milk. The army is redistributing the land. Chavez and his successors did everything they could to crack down on free enterprise in Venezuela. If I'm sure you recall, Venezuela was a free market society with a middle class and with an industrious class from the peons on downward. I hate to use that word, but from the working man on upward and etc. It was, but all of a sudden, Chavez came in and promised them everything, kept giving them, threw people off the ranches, threw people out of apartments, put his own people in, bloated the bureaucracy. In short, all of the things that are happening today here in America. Only here in America, it's not as blatant. But there, it was very blatant. But the results, and it was fueled by oil, was that the country and the economy ultimately came to a standstill. And you know as well as I do that the Venezuelan economy right now, which was vibrant, industrious, and growing, is now stagnant and all but dead.
Right.
And the simple point is, where are the people going to go? They have to do something. And I think as someone told me yesterday, the reason the army is supporting the leftists is because the army generals are so corrupt with cocaine, traffic, etc., that they're afraid if democracy came back, they'd be in jail or worse, dead.
Okay. We got a little over a minute. Let's go to our last topic briefly, and that's what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz with Yemen and Iran threatening to clog the routes of 30% of the oil. It appears that things are not quieting down in that area. The ISIL, which is partially backing the Yemen terrorists, is finding that maybe the attack on Mosul isn't going quite as well as the United States government thought it was going to be, and it's getting bogged down. And ISIS has turned its efforts and it picked up a couple other cities in Iraq. So we got about 30 seconds. So give me your take on Yemen and the Straits.
Well, Iranian gunboats have now moved into the Straits, and we're going to start to see a confrontation there. I'm told by my naval sources that they expect something to break after the election. They don't think it'll be before. As far as the Iraqi situation, yes, it's bogged down, but eventually they will take Mosul, but it will be a shell of a city like Aleppo.
Right. Well, we're out of time. This is Dan Perkins.
Don Mazzella.
We're the two guys from Verona, and remember, if it's important to you, it's important to us.
It's important to us.
Right, and it's 2 weeks to election. See you next week.
You've been listening to Two Guys from Verona with Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella. For more information about Dan and Don, please visit twoguysfromverona.com. Tune in again next week to hear two guys from Verona give their unique take on today's world. Until then, have a great day, and remember to keep faith in America.